Part 1. The Sacrificial Lamb, Eden, North Arcadia, AA 632. Chapter 1. There have been two worlds, theirs and ours. Theirs ended some time ago, and ours grew from the wreckage of it, not in God's name, but by his hand and at his word, and his word is finite. From my studies, I have come to understand and believe that our world is superior to the one that the humans walked upon before. Our world is stronger, and so are the people upon it. Our world is healthier, are as its inhabitants. We the people are kinder, better educated, less crowded together, less miserable, more open, and much more prosperous. And even if someone from that world could travel forward in time to argue that point, there would be no point in doing so, because we are right. We have learned from their mistakes, and we have healed the world the way they forced God to destroy. We know things they did not. We have adapted to things in a way that they never could. Our world is almost perfect. But for all the advancements we have made, and for all their advancements which we have reversed for the greater good, people still cry in our world, because we are almost as human as the ones who existed before us. I had never been an emotional child, but I was scared and unhappy to be leaving my family, and so I bowed my head and allowed my tears to slip silently down my cheeks, smothering the sound, but not the emotion. My birthday had never been very celebrated in my family, but the ones before this one had been pleasant days, during which I'd received a pretty dress or a special cake, or a new doll or ball or something. Well, I had the new dress on, but it had been sewn for uniformity, gold silk, which was Arcadia's colour, but plain, with squared-off sleeves and a knee-length hem. No buttons, no frills, not bothering to decorate something that would never be beautiful. And even if it had been adorned with buttons and frills, I probably wouldn't have cared anyway, so heavy was my heart with sorrow. I probably wouldn't have cared if I'd been given a book, and I always wanted more picture books. No, the only wish I had for that birthday was an impossible one, to be allowed to stay with my family. But that wasn't to be, for I was a forbidden third-born child, and this was the day of my emancipation, which is an event that every illegally conceived third-born child must face on their 5th birthday, regardless of what caste they hailed from or their gender. In the Kingdom of Arcadia, the population laws are heavily enforced to prevent the population from exceeding the kingdom's resources, and anybody who lives here must adhere to that strict guideline or face banishment. Every couple, whether they be married in God's eyes or just legally joined for procreation purposes, are forbidden from producing more than 2 children, and to make this easier, infallible birth control is circulated. But somehow, my mother had fallen pregnant with me after already having 2, and though she'd been able to keep me and rear me into the age of 5, the age where infancy ends, she'd always known that the day for me to be handed over to the crown would come, and since the June moon had risen today in conjunction with my 5th birthday, I'd ceased to be a blue-collar child, and would become given, instead, property of the Kingdom of Arcadia, to be used how they saw fit. Some people call it slavery, and some people call it an antiquated law, but the majority had too much faith in King Elijah to kick up a fuss and soothe their conscience with the knowledge that I'd be released at the age of 21, so it was simply my reality. It was horrible. It was a shadow my growth had been stunted under ever since I'd gotten old enough to see the disapproving looks I got from law-abiding families, and it was non-negotiable. The laws were stricter here in Arcadia than anywhere else in Khalil, but the only kingdom on our continent that actually encouraged population growth was too far away for my little 5-year-old legs to run to, so I put one foot in front of the other and followed my mother dutifully, hoping that my obedience would counteract my blotchy face. As I walked, I tried to comfort myself with the knowledge that I'd be allowed to visit with my mother and family in 6 months' time, but that only made me feel worse. 6 months until I should see her again. 6 months until I sleep in my own bed. What is 6 months? Oh, I wish I understood what's to become of me. Crying publicly was an error on my part. I knew as much, because not only is grief considered a slap in God's face, but I look like a welt when I cry, and I was supposed to be presenting my best self that morning, not just physically, but emotionally too. I was supposed to look strong and sweet, and eager to meet the Duchess and Princess, like I'd seen the other girls look since January. Like being born as the 3rd unwanted child and handed over to the crown was some sort of blessing and not a curse. Like I'd accepted my lot and knew that I was doing what God wanted, not what my king was demanding of me. I suppose it was a blessing, or at least other people said it was, for in any other year I would have been immediately shipped off to one of the other kingdoms on the continent of Khalil to fill a population quota as a servant, without any thought being put behind the decision. That was a given child's usual fate, but apparently there was something special happening this year that had changed things. I didn't know why or how, only that it had something to do with the fact that Prince Cohen and Prince Cole of Arcadia were turning 5 this year as well, and so one of them would get to decide what to do with me, rather than me being herded off onto some carriage depot or some shipping dock. The information I managed to glean was hazy at best, but I did know that a similar exception had been made 13 years ago, when Carol Barrett-Shiel, next in line for the throne, had turned 5 as well, and again, before that, when our current king, Elijah, had celebrated his own 5th birthday in AA 585. Perhaps deciding what to do with the third-born girls that year was a birthday gift of some sort that served to give them a taste of the power that they might one day wield over their people. Or maybe I was considered lucky to share a birth year with a potential future monarch, and rewarded for it as a token of the kingdom's kindness. But either way, a lot of whispering had been done behind my back over the years concerning my fate without involving me. I didn't like it one little bit. At least the other Given kids had known what was to become of them and when they'd walked over the bridge and into their futures. I had no idea. And why was it that girls were being made examples of, not the boys? As far as I knew, the 3 boys in our blue-collar village, who had been born 3rd and turned 5 this year, had been shipped off to the train for the salvage corps, like every other year. My sister Jaya, who was 12, and old enough to know what was truly happening to me, had hinted that I was lucky, but she'd done so with that gleam in her brown eyes that I did not like, and because she was the only person in my family who'd offered up any enlightenment at all, I could not stifle my sorrow, and my mother did not reprimand me for it, so I cried on, accepting her silence as a permission to feel as I did. Perhaps she hadn't noticed my tears, or perhaps she was trying to demonstrate the fact that my tears were no longer her responsibility to me, to who's watching, and to herself. I'd reached for her hand before, but she had clasped her own in front of her and was walking with her head bowed, as though she was just some stranger who I'd fallen in step with. Perhaps she is praying, asking for her strength not to cry, as I ought to be doing. Our happiness gives God his power. I am hurting him by feeling so sorry for myself. But how can this be happening already? They make us wait till we are 5 so we're ready to be separated from our families, but I don't feel ready. I risked a peek up at my mother as we walked through the palace gates, hoping to see something on her face, something for me, but her porcelain features were fixed into a smooth mask, like one of the many dolls I had left behind, unplayed with. I knew that she'd already left me behind too. She'd probably farewelled me when she kissed me goodnight the evening before, just as she'd probably been farewelling me every day since I'd been born. I'd been part of her household, but not part of the family, and the only person who had wept when I'd left had been my big brother Finch, whose absence I already felt like a hole in my chest. Finch wanted to grow up to be a soccer player, and in a truly perfect world, I would have followed him, for I loved anything that concerned the outdoors. But this wasn't a perfect world, just one that was supposed to be perfectly balanced, and they are 2 very different things. Finch would never have time to learn how to play soccer in a way that would suffice to gain him entrance into the athletic cast, and I would never practice with him again. I wiped at my eyes, clearing my vision when I noticed that a carriage had been parked in front of the palace, and a very handsome, very familiar bearded man was helping a beautiful girl out after him. She wore a pretty white dress that was fitted to her figure with gold trim. He wore a dazzling golden crown, and my heart rusted over at the sight of them, for all of that precious gold made me feel worthless in comparison. Was King Elijah going to be present when I was claimed? I'd known that the Duchess would be, but not the King, and where was he coming from at this early hour? My knees felt weak as I grew nearer and nearer to the grand steps of Eden, and saw the ivy-coloured gates open, and my mother did touch me then, to catch me and hurry me forward. When her duty was done and my feet beneath me once more, she released my upper arm and continued on. God give me strength. I wanted to ask her if the entire city was going to be there to witness me being judged out in the sunlight in full view of the markets, where I'd usually worked with my mother or Jaya every Saturday, but my throat was being strangled by fear, so I began to look around for the king's eldest son, Carol, who was the next in line to the throne. I'd never seen him before, but my sisters swore he was the most handsome man to ever walk the earth, short of Miguel Barachiel. That was. Oh, she's very plain, a woman whispered pityingly as we stepped onto the bridge and began to pass the market people set up on the overpass. Pale, like a northerner, a man agreed, his voice muffled by the gurgling white water beneath him, but not enough for my eager ears, which had been waiting for some sort of helpful information to present itself for weeks. They'll put her in the corps, I'm certain. But she's an artisan's daughter, I think, and they usually blossom the brightest within the harem. I knew what an artisan was, and I was not one of them. My father was a blue-collar, and that meant that I was too. So whatever an artisan's child was expected to be able to do well, I would surely not be able to do it. But my mind hung onto the word harem. I didn't know what that was, but I reminded myself to look into it when, or if, I got the chance. I memorized most of the names of the caste within our society, from largest to smallest. The blue-collars, the academics, the farmers, the artisans, the given, the nobility, the nephilim, the athletes, and the royals. But harem was not one of them. I hoped it was a factory of some sort, and not a caste from the outside world, something sinister like the Fallen or the pirates. The beautiful ones, perhaps, but that one is anything but. She'll end up in the gardens, mark my words, if not sent off south. Garden? I could work here in Eden? Oh, that would be lovely. I ignored the offensive parts of the woman's commentary, because they rolled off me like water off an ugly duckling's back. I'd been attending classes with the other kids in my village for 2 years by then, and there wasn't a mean word that these adults could fling about to describe me that I hadn't heard before. I was more excited by the prospect of working with flowers to pay her any mind beyond what I wanted to hear. Finch had warned me that I'd probably end up hard labour until I was 21, but working in a garden didn't sound so bad at all. If I'd been able to stay amidst the blue collars, that is exactly what I would have wanted to do once my time to work came. My father had been a builder and my mother a seamstress, and they seemed like very boring choices to me. But working with blossoms outside, that I could get excited about. With that skin? Heavens no! If they don't keep her inside, she'll become a pile of ashes. I frowned at that, staring down at my knees from beneath the hem of my gold dress, and saw that they were bruised from where I'd copped a few soccer balls to the shins from Finch the day before. Now my complexion looked almost sickly in contrast to the purplish smudges on my legs, but I wasn't red or blistered. I could live with being plain, but not being locked inside the palace walls, and I oughtn't be, because as white as my skin was, I'd yet to see it freckle, peel or burn from the exposure to the sun. My mother tried to keep me indoors because she'd always worried about that same thing, but I snuck outside every chance I got. I'd never been sun-stung. Finch said that I was so bright they simply reflected the sun and burned those around me, and J.O. agreed, saying that I was the reason why she had so many darned freckles. I don't know why they bothered her, for J.O. was beautiful. She had straight dark hair, sparkling eyes and creamy skin, and the freckles across her nose were pretty, like little cinnamon-coloured constellations, just like Mother. Would she grow up to be tall like her, or more like Father, who was also dark and squatter, and more muscular? And what if I never got to find out? Jaya had told me that sometimes the families gave their children away and never gave them a second look after, and if that was true and I turned out to be one of them, I'd never survive the rejection. My heart was racing. For years I tried to learn more about what being given to the crown meant for my future, but now that I was on the precipice of knowing what my path would be, I would nothing but to turn on my heel, run home, and never give any of this business a moment's thought again. I hated being a girl. What I'd give to trade places with Finch and learn how to build things when he turned 16, the way my father had. What I'd give to be fortifying the bridge I was crossing into Eden with stones and mortar and gold dust like Father had, rather than being propelled forward into uncertainty. Her hair is grey, exploded a girl of about 13 who was fanning herself from the spring heat from behind a stall selling jars of preserves. She burst into a fit of giggles. She's like a little grandmother. Cohen won't want her in his face every day. Why would I be in Prince Cohen's face? Gosh, is there really a chance I could work right here in the palace? Eglantine, be nice, her mother chided. It is her birthday month, and she's been taken from her parents, so she must be very frightened. And dear Cohen needs another friend today more than ever before. Perhaps he'll accept this one for that reason alone. Eglantine ducked her head, feigning shame, but it was not her words that had bothered me, but her mother's. Why did the prince's state of mind have to do with my arrival? And why would my looks prevent me from working within the castle? We were crossing the second side of the Golden Palace gates, and everything loomed over and seemingly over me, growing taller and larger with every step I took, and I began to shrink down under the weight of the auspicious moment. Could I be overlooked for garden duty because I'm not pretty? But I'm so good at it. The caste system is in place to ascertain that we are doing what we do best, and I grow things well. What do my looks have to do with that? Could I really end up canning fish instead of working with flowers because I'm unattractive? I shuddered and glanced out of the sparkling ocean to the side of us, silently begging God to return now, to take us all up to heaven so I could stay with my family forever then on, or before my wicked thoughts could alert Satan to my misery. But God did not grant my wish, because God could not do anything more to help his mortal souls any more. If I wanted him to save me when he returned, I had to save myself in his name, and stop whispering please to Satan. The people I'd passed stopped whispering about me and started selling their wares again, and my mother was walking fast as though she were a tourist from one of the other kingdoms who wanted to touch the stone walls of the palace. Visitors came to North Arcadia for that purpose of all the time, to stand where the Angel Miguel had given up his life for mankind's second chance. The fortress he had started building for his wife and son, the tidal falls rushing past the Wildwoods River, and the beautiful palace grounds surrounding it, had come to be known as Eden, which was a name taken from one of the old Bible stories from the time before. We didn't like to put much weight into any of those silly stories now that we knew how many of them had been lies, but Eden had been a real place, the first place, and had meant paradise to mankind before and now. It stood for that same thing. Except within the walls of our Eden, apples grew in abundance, people wore beautiful clothes instead of fig leaves. Honestly, the old world had believed the most ludicrous stories, and everyone was always allowed in if they had just cause. Right then I could see that members of the caste who were at their leisure were milling about on the common to the left of the castle, having picnics while artisans danced, painted and sang for their amusement. I had always begged my mother and father to take me to the common more often, as had J.R., but they had been too busy since father's accident, which had happened the year before my birth, and had haunted our family since, as much as my arrival into the world had. Walking that far pained him, and mother was too busy sewing uniforms for the corps to go anywhere while the sun was out. Finch said that before I was born, and before father's fall, mother and father had gone to the palace balls at least twice a year. But they'd stopped since they'd broken the rules, probably for fear of being shamed when they were asked about their offspring. In fact, they rarely went anywhere, or took me anywhere, for that precise reason. So I watched the people enjoying the common grounds as we passed by it, getting so distracted by a beautiful dancer in an outfit made of chiffon and dangling beads, that I didn't realize that we'd arrived at my destination until my mother stopped walking and I practically collided into the back of her. End of chapter 1.